This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
It's another Friday morning, so back at it with another edition of Play-by-Playcast. My name is Joel Godet. Thanks as always for the stream, the subscription, the download, however you found us to listen to today, be it on iTunes or Stitcher or any number of other places, YouTube, that you can find this podcast, some of which I don't even know about, which is odd considering, I'm the one that publishes it. But you never know. Like, I've stumbled upon it on random websites that pick up the feed. So, if you're one of the people listening to it there, welcome. This is, of course, the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. It's a professional development podcast diving into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. And before we get to our guest today, the voice of the Washington State Cougars, Matt Chazanow, wanted to pull back the curtain a little bit and kind of give you a glimpse into the preparations of people during the NCAA tournament. We've talked about it before on this podcast. I tweeted out during the week. By the way, you can find us on Twitter, at PXPcast, or I'm at Joel Godet. But I tweeted out during the week links to episodes previous with Chris Carino, who does the NCAA tournament on Westwood One, and Andrew Catalan. I tweeted that out yesterday, who does the NCAA tournament for CBS, and we've talked about preparation. And Richard Deitch has done this with guys on the Sports Illustrated, or the previous Sports Illustrated sports media podcast. About their preparations for the NCAA tournament and what it's like and how you basically cram for the amount of teams you're going to see as quickly as you see them. And I've talked about it a couple of times on the podcast. I've been unbelievably blessed to be able to do some work with CBS Sports Network this past year, and I did one game on ESPNU. One. Still get all the emails. So it's kind of an interesting window into how people prepare for the NCAA tournament when they're calling the games or when they're at that level and they need to know a lot of information quickly. I woke up this morning and had a CBS email in my inbox. It was sent at 3:03 a.m. today, and it is all of the research from yesterday's roundup. So, like, if I'm waking up today calling games on CBS, I just open up my inbox and I've got 2 word attachments that have everything I need to know about every game, which is really kind of cool. And I know people have talked about, previous guests have talked about research packets and things of that nature, but I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of an insight now that I'm holding one firsthand of what it looks like. So if I open the recap from yesterday, this is the CBS recap. It will tell me Thursday's things to know. Rob Gray scored 23 of Houston's 28 second-half points, and gives me the whole breakdown. Houston in the second half versus San Diego State. Gray versus the rest of the team. Largest wins by a 13 seed over a 4 seed in the history of the NCAA tournament. Of course, Buffalo just lambasted Arizona yesterday. So I can tell you, 1985, Navy beat LSU, 23 points. Buffalo over Arizona, 21. That ties Siena beating Vanderbilt by 21 in 2008. So then it gives me all these different nuggets on that. Colin Sexton by half. How he did in the first half when he scored 3 points. How he did in the second half when he scored 22 for Alabama. And then I've got Word documents attached here. And literally every game that was played yesterday, 8 to 10 bullet points on every single game. Kansas versus Penn. Bill Self, 34th NCAA tournament win at Kansas, ties him with Roy Williams for most by head coach in school history. And Penn led by as many as 10 in the first half and was leading as late as 2:35 in the first half. So all those quick nuggets, it just wraps it up into a nice little bow. Now, I mean, that's a research packet is what it is. What's really cool is the emails that you get that have the pre-prep in them before the tournament ever starts. So I've got about 84 PDFs that I can open up here. We'll pick one randomly. Here's Iona. So you open up this PDF for Iona, and it tells you in like the most organized fashion ever. Record, how they earned their bid, their conference, their location. The school's enrollment is 3,329 people. Tells you their arena and how many people it holds, which is almost the entire enrollment of the school, by the way. All their previous tournament appearances, Sweet 16 appearances, Elite 8 appearances, Final Fours, championships, who the head coach is, a random coach factoid. There's literally a line that says coach factoid. Tim Clues was the 2014 MAAC Basketball Coach of the Year, has totaled 182 wins as head coach of Iona, second most in program history to Jim McDermott, who has 319. They've got his previous record in the NCAA tournament. They've got the previous 5 seasons record and BPI for Iona. They've got the entire team's roster. They've got obvious information, head coach assistants, SID, all that stuff. Pronunciation guide is on here. And then on page 2, player notes. So bullet points on a whole bunch of players that are important. It's storylines, things of that nature. It then gives you a record breakdown. It then gives you team notes. It then gives you their schedule, win, loss, score, record, rank, top scorer for every game. After that, it gives you individual statistics. After that, it gives you the split stats. Home, road, neutral, wins, losses, conference, non-conference, AP, top 25, unranked by month, starters, bench, record win, halftime highs and lows are all in this packet as well. You get one of those for every team in the NCAA tournament. And then on top of that, let's see, there were a whole bunch of, here we go. There's an active career leader PDF that you get for the NCAA tournament. So everybody who's in the NCAA tournament this year, what are their career stats? I can tell you that Purdue's Vincent Edwards is the current leader for active career points per game in the NCAA tournament, minimum 3 games played. Joel Berry, most total points. Vincent Edwards, most rebounds per game. Like, it gives you everything you could ever need to know. And it's been like lunacy trying to digest it all when you're on the outside looking in. Like, I'm not doing the NCAA tournament, so I haven't read all of those from the standpoint of needing to know that information. It's just been lunacy trying to digest it as basically a fan. And it's cool to see how the other side lives, how your Brian Andersons and your Andrew Catalans and your Carter Blackburns and your Jim Nances and your Iron Eagles prepare. So kind of a glimpse into that world and how that's all done. But when people talk about it, and they've done it on this podcast before, what kind of preparation they have, that's what they're talking about. Here's another one, by the way. We'll open this one up and then we'll move forward. So these are your game prep notes for each matchup. So not just individual teams, but here's South Dakota State versus Ohio State. South Dakota State, side by side. One column, Ohio State on the other column. And it's got team records, etc. It puts their stats basically head-to-head. Not head-to-head, but, like, what's this team score? What's that team score? What's this team's three-point defense? What's that team's three-point defense? It will actually give you their series history, their common opponents this season. It's nuts. Like, they give you so much information. It's crazy. And, hey, here's to one day hopefully being able to use it. We'll see. One day. Anyway, on to today's guest. Matt Chazanow is our guest, and he's been the voice of the Washington State Cougars since July of 2015. So this is his 3rd season of football and basketball and some baseball at Washington State as well. And Matt's got an interesting path because he started at IMG, or he started at ISP, in Winston-Salem and started as a studio host and a barista. He'll get into that. He was doing play-by-play on the side. He was working at High Point. He was working at UNCG. He was cobbling things together, then became full-time at ISP, IMG, became a network manager, and eventually winds up as the voice of an IMG property at Washington State. So Matt will give us the entire details of how his whole career has progressed, but that's kind of the long and short of it. And we'll talk about working with a legend, Bob Robertson, who for like 90 years was the voice of Washington State. He's still there. He is still in the booth with Matt. So what it's like being able to have his knowledge around and have a three-man booth, because Jason Gesser is also in the booth with him. So being able to navigate that. What it's like going to Washington State when he was their network manager. He oversaw a lot of the Western schools, but wasn't tied to Wazoo before he got the Wazoo position, which is the same spot I was in when I got to Ball State. And there are many people that have that same experience in broadcasting and in coaching and other professions. So I was curious to get his take on how you ingrain yourself in the society, in the culture of a new society, and what it's like trying to become one of the people that listen to you, one of the fan base, one of your listeners, what it's like to become a Coug, basically. So we'll dive into all of that and much more. But where we start, Matt Chazanow is a Syracuse grad. Like myself, he was a senior when I was a freshman. So we start in central New York, and I was curious if he had any stories about the guys that he was with when he was at WAER, and that's Jason Horowitz, Westwood One, CBS, Big Ten Network, Anish Shroff, friend of the pod, Matt Martucci, friend of the pod, voice of the St. Joseph's Hawks. Jason Benetti was also there when Matt Chazanow was in college, and every time Jason's name comes up on the podcast, someone inevitably texts him about it, and then I inevitably get a text from Jason that says, "What did you say about me on the podcast?" So with that being said, I asked Chaz for a story on Jason Benetti. And that's where we start. Quick primer as well. You're going to hear the name Jeff Tiberi because Jason, Chaz, and Tibbs, Jeff Tiberi, lived together in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, when Chaz was starting out at ISP and then eventually working at IMG full-time. Tibbs went to college at Syracuse as well with Chaz and with Jason. They then lived together in North Carolina. Tibbs is an NPR radio voice in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and is phenomenal at what he does. You might not know his name at a national level, but an amazing talk show host and an amazing radio personality and an overall just amazing dude who was the talk show director at the student radio station when I was a freshman. So that is who Jeff Tiberi is, who you will hear about a little bit in some of Matt Chaznow's stories here. But without further ado, let's dive into the story of Matt Chazanow and Jason Benetti and the High Point Panthers to start things off on this week's edition of Play-by-Playcast.
No, I mean, Jason and I lived together for years, actually. And we lived together in North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
My first ever job being paid as a play-by-play guy was High Point Panther women's basketball. And I was at a bar getting lunch with Jason in Winston-Salem. It was pouring outside. And he says, you know, I heard the women's spots open because he was doing the men. And he said, I heard the women's spots open. I think you could probably get it. I know other folks are applying, but you know, it felt like the biggest job in the world at the time. It felt like I was going to go call, you know, games for
Duke
or the Yankees or something. And so I think I like sprinted out into the rain, like some really melodramatic thing, and like got to a laptop as absolutely soon as I could, applied. And I remember in the application process, over the guy's shoulder I was talking to, I saw his computer in kind of an eavesdroppy way. I almost felt bad about it. I sort of saw his email, but didn't mean to, you know. Noticed that I had sent my resume to him like 15 times in his inbox. And, my name was in his inbox like 15 consecutive times in the same email. I said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I guess my internet, I thought it wasn't sending. I kept hitting send, and it went through every single time." And he said, "No, it just kind of shows you want it." And I just kind of got lucky. It didn't piss him off, I guess. So I got it. And anyway, so Jason and I lived together for a year. Oh, Jeff Tabiri.
Oh, yeah.
Jeff was and I lived with Jeff too. And the three of us lived together to start out my post-college career. And Jeff Tibbs was a talk show guy. He wasn't on staff at AER, but Jeff is a wonderful guy, and Jeff's one of the best conversationalists I've ever known. Jeff was a way better talk show guy than I ever was. Way better. Like, it's not my thing. We all know what we're good at and what we're not good at, and I'd be better at it now. At the time, I was trying to figure out what I'd love to do. And, we all love doing this. There's kind of niches within the niche. There's broadcasting. You could do TV and radio, has its different nuances and all this stuff. Well, Jeff was really good at talk. I mean, he was very talented at it. And he and Nick Wright used to work together a lot. I remember that. So he used to get under my skin on purpose. I mean, that's kind of the goal of the whole gig. He would needle me. And I committed the cardinal sin of all this, really the one thing you can't do. I got so frustrated, I muted his mic. I turned him off. And he got so mad at me, and he walks out of the studio. And he comes back in after a break, and I just said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do that." And, of course, we made up and all that stuff. But it was really just this funny moment where that was the dorky radio guy version of like a real big fist fight in a bar after a big night of drinking. Is two radio guys, one of them muted his mic, gasped from the crowd, just can't believe it. I did that to him. So apologies again to Jeff.
Take me back kind of big picture. Before you even got there and before you started to get to know those guys, of growing up as a guy in New Jersey, what led you to want to go to Syracuse? What led you to want to get into broadcasting in the first place?
Honest to God, I did not know about Newhouse coming out of high school.
Stop it.
I didn't even know about it.
How did you wind up there?
I loved the school. I visited a bunch of other schools. I was half-heartedly interested in the rest of them, and I had no doubt I wanted to go to Syracuse. I was arts and sciences year one. In fact, if we're just kind of name-dropping AER guys, I was kind of trying to find my way. I talked to the crew coach.
Okay.
I thought maybe I wanted to do crew. that would have been a bit of running my head into a wall, I think, over and over again. So I go kind of going around campus trying to figure out what I want to do, and I had heard my mom and dad tell me for many years that I could achieve academically, and not that I hadn't at all to that point, but I definitely had half-assed it, and I hope my language was okay there. For too long, I was a 79.5 get a B student, squeaked by to maximize my fantasy baseball and Madden timed. In college, I kind of decided I wanted to really attempt to do something, and I had heard the two best colleges on campus were Maxwell and Newhouse, and I say that with all due respect to like fashion design and architecture, two places that I didn't even walk into because I knew I had just no shot, and didn't, I frankly have much inclination, probably not an artistic bone in my body in that regard.
You and Damon John would have been a great team.
It wasn't not for me. I go to Newhouse, and Anish Shroff is holding a meeting, and he's saying the history of AER. So I really found out about Newhouse once I got on campus. And then Anish, who was the first guy to actually show me how to use a cart, which I don't even know that you guys use. I'm sure you don't use anymore.
We did.
Yeah, it's got to be gone. It's got to be. Bulking carts. I actually thought that stuff was fun. I loved it. I loved every second of it. I was so enthralled with the detail orientation. I think I was excited to be part of there's a real academic slant to what goes on there, and I really liked that. I was stimulated by it. I really loved that. Anish was talking about how competitive it is, how 50, 60 guys will sign up, and 40 in all likelihood, 40 to 50 will get cut. And we are purposely weeding people out, and you got to wake up at 3:30 in the morning for dedication just to show you want to be here, and you got to all that stuff. And I said that this is for me. I'm ready to do something like this. Just felt right. And Matt Lincoln, who was in Jason's class, Link was the one who was a PD, and he was supposed to call you if you were selected for the opportunity to be one of those 50, 60 guys who they may eventually cut or make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He called my room phone, and I had never gotten a call on my room phone before. He must have been using the school directory. So he didn't call my cell. Well, I thought I didn't make it because I was a sophomore. I was a year late when I started. So I figured that I didn't get on there, and I was crushed because I kind of found something that I thought I just felt right. All the things Anish said, and aside from the sort of opportunity for glamour to go try and be Marv Albert, and I grew up a Knicks fan and listened to Marv and all that stuff. Shelving that, I just thought that I'd love doing it, and for about 4, 5, 6 hours, I knew it was the day they were going to call people to let them in. And I start walking around. I think I found Anish when he left Newhouse. I said, is there anything you can do? Do you know this guy, Matt Lincoln? Of course, can you talk to him? I knew nothing about anything. I wasn't even in Newhouse. I hadn't even transferred anything. I get back to my room, and I'll never forget seeing the blinking light on my phone, and I kind of knew it was going to be Matt. It was, and I was highly motivated. I wrote down on the sheet that they passed out, they said, if you miss one cast, you will get cut, and we're trying to find reasons to cut you. And I remember they said, here, write down your name and your phone number. That's all you need, and it's a random selection. And I wrote down on there, I said, I'll never miss a morning cast, and I didn't, and I loved it. I really did.
So what do you I feel like the question people always ask me when they find out what I do for a living is like, how did you get into this? And did you always who did you listen to growing up? And did you turn down the sound on your TV and do play-by-play? That doesn't sound like it was you necessarily. Like what turned you on to say this is my life's calling? What did Anish say that triggered your fancy?
For me, conversation was always a hobby. It was. I grew up in a household with 2 Ivy League educated parents, one of whom was a major in English and taught English and wrote books. And I grew up in a household that took great pleasure in spending time communicating. So for me, the passion of this lies in reaching out to people and conversing with them. And you can glean so much out of what these games are as a metaphor. Well, the reason why we really like sports is because they're a metaphor for much larger things. And in the end, you can go to the game and there's no effect on life. The beauty of it is actually that it's not important. Everybody goes back to work the next day. It's okay. You have bragging rights. That's kind of the extent of it. I never really considered it as a real career when I was in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, but I was that kid. There are those little teensy cassette tapes on those handheld recorders way back in the day before anything was digital.
Oh yeah.
There's audio of me in the car going on multiple vacations with my family. We used to go camping to Acadia National Park. So we had these long drives up to Maine. And I used to create fictitious disaster scenarios. I'd be in the back seat. So I'm 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, something like that. And I would say hey Mom, and I'm frantic, right? Mom, Godzilla's chasing after us. I probably watched Godzilla or King Kong or something. Here's what's going on the road, and I want to interview her like a news reporter. and I even called it the New York News on the phone, on that little recorder, and there's 9 years somewhere that exists in some basket my mom has.
That needs to come out immediately.
I know. I would get such a kick out of it. It's a great memory for me. My sister would get into it, and she's 4 years younger. She thought it was she's like 2, or 3. And so I was always playing with it. I always listened to the radio and always mute the TV. And sometimes I would call the game. I did all that stuff. So I loved it. I always did. Was always a junkie for it. I just had never made the connection to maybe I should give it a shot myself as a profession. In saying that out loud almost sounds silly, but I didn't really know of it as an option. My parents were academics. They wanted me to be. And this was sort of an opportunity for me to blend those worlds. I was a mediocre athlete. I wasn't practiced enough. I could have played like D3 basketball.
What did your academic parents think when you said I'm going to be a sports broadcaster?
They were sweet. They were supportive, and I think they thought that. I think this too
shall pass.
Yeah, a little bit of that. I think so. I think my mom. My mom's funny. My mom is a PhD and an archaeologist and an incredibly accomplished woman professionally and really bright. It's just and an incredible role model professionally growing up in retrospect. and she's a tough cookie too. I mean, she's grew up in Jersey City. She's a strong, powerful academic, accomplished woman. And I think that she loves that I'm in a spot that I'm in and all that. But somewhere deep down, I think she's wondering, like, because she still doesn't know what a first down is, She's like, okay, I get that it's a job. I just kind of can't believe that it's a job. That kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So how did you take me on the path now too? You go to Syracuse, you go to North Carolina. Was that straight out of school? You went to North Carolina?
Yeah. Yep.
So you started working for ISP then right away.
Yeah, that's right. So this is where the network of Syracuse guys really comes into play. So I was in Boston I was at an ex-girlfriend's house and got an email from Matt Park, who is obviously the current Q's play-by-play guy. And Matt said it was heads up. I heard that Corey Provis is leaving Winston-Salem, and Corey now does the Twins.
Yeah.
And Corey worked in Winston-Salem at this place called ISP. They do a bunch of professional broadcasts down there in college sports, but they're growing and they may need some studio hosts, but at minimum, Corey is leaving. So there's one spot open, but I think there might be 2. He said something like that in the email. And I'm in Boston and I didn't have a car. So for me, it was like a no-brainer. I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I was in college sports right now as a student, and I knew the world, and I knew I wanted to do radio, and I knew it was just perfect. It was a company that did what I wanted to do, and they're offering work, and that's the hardest thing to find right away, is to find somebody who's going to take a crack at you. And their business model was to try to find somebody affordable, and God knows that's what I was. So I emailed Tiberi. I'm in Boston, and he's in Syracuse. And I said, hey, I just forwarded you an email. I gave him a call. Just forwarded you an email. And it's funny, now that I'm telling you the story, my 315 number just flashed in my head, 315-382-7975. That was a flip phone I had, my first ever cell phone. So I emailed Jeff, and I go, hey, if I take a bus to Syracuse, do you want to go down with me and talk to these guys? If I reach out, this guy, Corey Provis, who I'd never heard of before. This guy, Corey Provis, who Park knows, says there might be an opening. And Jeff said, sure. And so I took a bus instantaneously from Boston, the next bus. I swear it was the next bus out of Boston. I took a bus, whatever the distance of that bus ride was, 5, 6, 7 hours. I have no idea off my head, to Syracuse. And then he picked me up in his It was a great car. He had this great beat up college car. And picked me up straight from the bus station at Syracuse and drove me down to Winston-Salem. We interviewed. I'd forgotten a belt. His girlfriend bought me a belt at Walmart that I wore for like almost 10 years after that. We stayed at the cheapest hotel in Winston-Salem. There were cigarette burns in the sheets.
That's about right.
Yeah. We told them where we were staying years later, and they were actually like concerned for our safety. It was great. So we get the job. They thought I showed up in a suit for a job that paid like $5,000 for the year part-time or something like that. All I could think is, I'm sure other people are going to apply for that. Nobody wants this more than me. So I had to be here kind of thing. And in my mind, I was like, oh no, I didn't consider overdoing it, but in retrospect, had it been the wrong hiring person, there's a chance they might have said, well, this guy's kind of out of his mind. What's going on here?
This is like High Point before High Point.
It's exactly right. Yeah, I was that guy who sent 15 emails in the inbox, and I showed up in a suit for that job. Exactly.
So the moral of the story is send lots of emails and show up in suits.
Yeah, I guess so. Be ridiculously eager. But yeah, so that's the initial foray. Yeah, I did Pittsburgh right out of school, so that was how that happened.
How did you progress at ISP, then eventually IMG? And I'm imagining at some point in time you're always wanting to do play-by-play, and that's, I'm sure, where High Point comes in and all of that. But kind of take me down the road of what it's like being on the inside, kind of down at IMG in Winston-Salem.
So I started part-time. For 2 years, I was doing Starbucks, substitute teaching, and ISP, High Point Panther women, and then occasionally some UNC Greensboro Olympic stuff on the internet. And I actually got 4 men's games to call at UNCG. With ISP, they had a respect for what I was doing. I think, just to try to make ends meet and the desire to be there, and there's kind of a starving artist element to what we all are doing when we first get out of school. So there was a certain, I think, respect, for just the hustle. And every company wants to be wanted, Yeah. So I think my first year out of school, I made $12,000, and I didn't ask mom and dad for help. I remember thinking this was my choice. This was my burden. And they gave me, I got in my family that you get a college education and you get a car. So you get educated and you get mobility. And they were like, that's what we do. And you'll hand that down to your kids. And and what a gift. I mean, what more can you give? And I remember thinking I've got all I need. So I should be able to do this. So my first year there, I'm doing all this part-time stuff, but slowly but surely you kind of start to get an itch for like, okay, this could be paying bills month to month shouldn't be such a victory. That felt monumental. So the next year, I think I made $14,000. It felt like a money shower. And then what really happened was I realized I could still do the part-time ISP stuff. And if I could, and get rid of the Starbucks stuff and all that stuff, I got hired by UNC Greensboro full-time in their athletic department. So I really got my full-time start there. And what happens is once you get your first full-time job, and Newhouse was really good. They said this when I was at school. Once you get one job, somebody else will say, okay, they took a chance on hiring him and the investment that is. Maybe we can too. So I wasn't at UNCG more than for full time. I'm not even sure I was there long enough for health benefits to kick in, like 90 days or however it worked with that. I might actually be blending Starbucks and UNCG with health benefits, but I wasn't there long enough, and at either, frankly. And ISP hired me in 2008. So once I got full time there, I realized my way to at least a little bit more comfort in life, and I could still do the on-air work, was to do a whole bunch of off-air work. So I did production. I called radio stations to take content. And I loved that stuff too, because I loved the whole industry. I was really happy to do more work. I didn't feel like I only wanted to do on-air stuff in this world. I liked the off-air stuff. I liked helping in other regards, helping sales staffs. I genuinely enjoyed that stuff. Some guys didn't like it as much as I did, I thought, and I really liked it. So I kind of dove in head first. So my first big game I got to call, I think I was like 24, and Pitt needed a fill-in. And I remember I was sitting courtside, and I had thought after the 12 grand, 14 grand years and like those first couple seasons, and UNCG hadn't hired me yet, I had considered quitting's the wrong word, but saying like, all right, I gave it a crack, and this is pretty brutal. You know, I don't know if this life is all it's really cut out for. It's not. It's just it was tough. Kind of along the way, every single time I got to that point, something good would happen that would really keep me involved. UNCG would hire me, ISP would hire me, stuff would pop up. So that was the first game I got. Kind of came out of nowhere. You know, I truly got almost literally a tap on the shoulder at my desk. Hey, I think we need you for this. And for me, it was like it was a huge deal. Because I was a young kid and hadn't really done any big games. I hadn't done any game anybody other than like friends and family had listened to for play-by-play. And got to Philly, and I'm sitting next to Dick Groat, who a younger generation may be less familiar with, but an older one would consider him to be like Michael Jordan. And I there was a moment when the ball went up in the air, and you know, there was a moment where I had to kind of take like a big gulp, like, okay, let me get through this, because it was the first game, the first moment where I thought, you know, I wonder if this is actually going to work out. I think this may actually happen, and even if it doesn't, I felt like I had achieved something, and in many ways I had. It was really exciting. So that was a sweet moment in retrospect, and kind of the first time, as you know, in answering your question, in like weaving my way up there, the first time I thought that I was gonna be able to call games, you know, at a level where folks might be listening. So it was really fun. So then after that, there was some other, year by year, some other national stuff would pop up. After 4 or 5 years of that, I had a pretty darn good resume, a bunch of big games I'd called, and then Washington State needed a guy, and they called me, and it was, 1, flattering, and 2, a no-brainer, you know.
Tell me about the Washington State move for you, just from the standpoint, and I relate to you a little bit in this regard, in that, and I mean, you even were more associated with Wazoo because you were working as kind of the West Coast guy with IMG as kind of a network manager, but not having graduated from there, not being from Pullman, not being one of them, so to speak, when you first got the job. And I even look back to like when I got Ball State, I literally had never been on campus until my first day working here. All I knew about Ball State before I got this job was that they went 12-0 and then eventually 12-2 in 2008. How did you overcome that initial hurdle from both a perception but also the reality of having to kind of make up for lost time and be able to digest history yourself so that you can talk about it when you need to?
There's only so much you can do, because you need people to the spirit of your question is the value of this role is very much correlated with tenure. And I used to think that I was mistaken previously before I got out here in thinking that if you just were someplace a long time, it couldn't but work out for you in that place. It was going to be a massive success. But what I realized is that's trust. The fans in these schools need to trust the person in this role. And if you're good, they'll tune in. If you're not good, I think eventually it just kind of the piece of inventory that it is, and the outlet that it is for fans, depending on your perspective, be it for the sales staff or be it for just the general media arm that it is. If it's not good, people don't like proactively say you're horrible or anything like that. They just kind of stop listening. And I think your burden's higher. Your burden to get folks to trust you is higher. And I guess the answer to that really is you can't do anything synthetic. You need to just be really consistent. You can't make huge mistakes. So you can't, in my world, Jason Gesser is the analyst. I've worked a lot with Alex Brink, guys who I knew already before I came out here. Of course, Drew Bledsoe is kind of hanging around the program. His son is on the team now. And I dove into the history the best I could, but I knew now, and I knew then, and I know now, there are Cougs in places who will forever know more about the 1976 Washington State team than I ever will. But I know more about these last 3 years than they ever will. And the access I have right now is going to build on itself. And in that regard, it's irreplaceable. So I don't think you can – I don't attempt to win the history game. I say essentially I'm a junior in college. People ask me, like, do you love the Cougs? Do you get into Washington State? I said, well, did you as a junior in school? And they're kind of floored. And I'm like, and I live here as an adult, and they feed me. Like, what this is all I've got. This is my job. This all I do every day is and I'm talking about like a fan hypothetically here. All I do every day is Washington State. So what do you think? You know what I mean? And I'm closer to this than you ever were. So once you kind of get, I shouldn't say, I don't mean to be so competitive about my associations. My implication is in the the spirit of challenging whether or not I secretly have orange pom poms I bring to the radio booth or something to watch the Syracuse game while I'm calling the Cougs. I almost find to be sort of silly because nothing could be from the truth. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything you can do, but I just, if you're good, it'll kind of work out, and about your team now and you cover them the best you can.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an answer to this question, too, because I don't even know it myself. I mean, for me, it was right place, right time. That might have been the case for you as well. But how do you go about trying to pitch yourself to a position that is not something you have a connection to? Because I feel like a lot of us in this industry go through that, where it's like, wow, that'd be a really great job. I've never lived there. I don't know anybody, and I don't know anything about the team. But when I get there, I feel like I can do the job, and once I'm immersed in it, I'm your guy. But we also work in an industry where people are so tethered to who you are that it's almost, that matters.
You're building a reputation with every email you send. You're building a reputation with every game you call, every person you meet, probably more importantly, especially when you're young. And you're sort of setting yourself up to be vetted from the moment you begin your career. And it's such a crapshoot in so many ways because there's few of these spots. And I think they have to want somebody new. In my instance, they wanted somebody with a fresh perspective. I think, these are questions I don't even, I'll ask him in 15 years. You know what I mean? if these folks are even around, if the same people are even around, I'll ask, and I'll have to ask, why'd you want me? And I'm sure some of it is they wanted somebody young with I know they liked the way I sound. They liked the way I called the game. And I know they vetted me before I ever knew it and all that stuff. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know. That's an assumption. I don't know. But to a degree they must have. And knew who I was. I had done the West Coast stuff off air, as you alluded to. I'd known a bunch of folks from that. I know that didn't hurt. I don't know the degree to which it helped. I know that it was a funny blend of really enjoying that off air work, but also being good on the air. There were kind of two separate things that I really happen to enjoy trying to excel at. So I think you kind of have to get lucky and hope that's what they want. There's really nothing you can do. You're doing you're doing Ball State. Well, if the Atlanta Hawks want a guy, and that's something that you think you'd be good for, and they have to want somebody who's not from Atlanta currently.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about that.
True. You talked about they liked your sound. Tell me about your sound a little bit. How did you develop into the play-by-play guy that you are now, and what's important in a play-by-play call to you?
What a great question. I in some way, you just got to be yourself. And in another way, you need to absolutely rip off as much stuff and steal from all these other great guys doing it. Combination of those two things, and I think you'll be somewhere in the middle. I listened to so many other guys, and I was really brutal with myself when I listened back to myself. I used to listen back to every single thing I did and just try and really break myself down from a fundamentals perspective. One of the things AER emphasizes is the nuts and bolts of it, the part you can control, your verb choice, your tense, your really kind of the writing element as the foundation of the way you call the game. But once you leave school, I think it flips over to how do you sound more so than, not more so than, but there's more of an emphasis, way more of an emphasis on what's your voice like, how do you sound? And one of the things I used to do when I was really young is I'd everybody sings in the shower or something like that. Well, I used to create fake game situations and call them with my eyes closed. And I remember thinking, if I can't sound the way I want to sound with a fake game I've created, how could I ever imagine sounding like I want to sound when I can't control what the guys are doing? So I used to do that kind of stuff. Like they probably were just reps and exercises without realizing it. It was like extra games to call in some way. And I was probably a little oddly intense about it. One of the great things about Winston-Salem was I listened to like 50, 60 guys, all the guys coming through there. And some of them were so good at what they do, and all the pro guys, all that stuff. So in short, I'd say that, I'd listen to myself constantly, and then I listened to all these other guys try to pick and choose things I really like, turns of phrases, ways they inflected, things like that.
What do you want to hear most on a broadcast, technically speaking, even beyond voice? Like, what's important to you to make sure that you get in?
I just want to know what's going on. I know that sounds really simple, but that's all people want. When people are listening to our broadcast, they're not in Chicago, and they're not in New Jersey, and they're not in Atlanta or Phoenix. Probably in the state of Washington, or they went to school here. We get tons of listeners on our app from people in France, and that's one of my favorite things is when I find out someone's listening in like Belgium or something. It's really cool.
That's cool.
They listen because they just want to know what's going on. They love the Cougs. It drives me absolutely crazy, and I think it's bad for the business. It's bad for the industry. It just drives me nuts if I'm listening to another game, and I listen all the time, and I don't know what's going on. The best guys not only tell me what's going on, but do it with great detail and are entertaining and are informative. If somebody's so caught up in their own performance or they're struggling in some regard, and I don't know what's going on, as simple as it is, that's what this really is. And at minimum, that's time and score. And at maximum, I can really picture what's going on and follow the ball. You know what I mean?
Do you work with a 3-person booth though?
Yeah, we've got the guy, the legendary voice of the Coug guy, been here this will be his 52nd year coming up. Bob Robertson. So he's in the booth as well, and his role is unique. That whole setup is unique, and it's a unique scenario. I mean, he's been around a really long time. The thing that's amazing about Bob is fans love him for one, but the thing that's amazing is he was there. He called the games in 1964. So he's got perspective and some memories of those games. I mean, I can barely remember what I had for dinner last night. This guy's talking about games in 1965. He referenced it once on the air. I remember thinking he did that game. It's amazing. So pretty cool resource to have.
How do you manage that, and how do you work everybody in, and how do you still establish what you need to do to be as descriptive as you want to be, but at the same time set them up to make them sound as smart as they are and let them kind of display their knowledge and if you're Jason, his knowledge of the game, and if you're Bob, his knowledge of kind of history and what he's seen and where he's been?
I try to give them softball lobs that they can just crush. out of the, and as cliche as that is, I rarely send them something that I don't know they can really drill. I never want to put them on the spot. And with Bob, with absolutely no commentary, guy's sharp as a tack. It's pretty amazing. Like I said, I really can't remember. I mean, I'm thinking right now what I did for dinner last night. I've got to rack my brain. I would never send him like, hey, do you remember anything from 1977? Like, I don't, that's crazy. That's an almost offensive question. It's putting him in a bad spot. So I try to put him in great spots, number one. And number two is just get out of the way. I often think that in calling all these great moments here, and I've had fantastic moments with Falk and Marks and just been super lucky. Whatever your ego is, if that's insufficient for you in doing the job, if you have to shove your guys out of the way more, then you're probably doing it wrong. There's something up with you. If you can't let Guess and Bob, and we've got a great sideline reporter, Jessamine. She does a really good job. She gets great stories on the sideline. My job is to make them sound great. If they do, I'm calling the game action anyway. So I'm in it. There's no way to pull me out of it. I'm baked in. So the more I can get them involved and make them sound really smart, prepped, analytical, whatever it is, then the better I sound, the better we all sound, and everybody kind of hugs each other. And listeners can feel the emotional state of the booth. And when everybody sounds good and is supported, fans can tell that. So I think
I had read you and Bob will talk for like 2 to 3 hours before a game. Is that true?
Nightmare scenario. Everybody's nightmare scenario is you're going to be late, right? Like I always joke, we have weird hours, but Wall Street opens and closes at a certain time. But like I got a buddy who works on Wall Street. He can go to the bathroom during trading, right? Like we work on these most strangely hard deadlines in any business ever. I got there really, really early, and I found by coincidence or probably by neuroses, because we're both out of our minds to a degree, Bob also would get there early and always had. And he wants to get there and see people, old friends, people who kind of come by the booth and say hey to Bob, who've been coming to Cougar games for 30 years, and Bob's been there for 50 years. So he wants to be able to soak that in. And so I would get there way early, and he did too. And I would just kind of sit there and on the step. There's nothing else to do. I was there so early. It was kind of, it was obscene. But so yeah, I'd be in the booth and he'd be there, and I would just I try not to bother him, because I still am in his eyes, probably a young whippersnapper, I know more people in the league now. So that time has now become actually more fact finding, get a lot of nuggets. I get a lot of thoughts of how pregame's going to go. And then it's more of almost like an informal format meeting before kick with Bob. It's more business now. We've kind of gotten past the feeling out process, and now it's more like working together, which is really fun.
What's the best thing Mike Leach has told you while you've been there?
It's probably something I can't tell you on the record. Actually, definitely something I can't tell you on the record. Coach is great.
Is it better than it's like Woodstock, but they're wearing clothes?
Yeah, it's probably. Yeah, I would say.
What's good about working with him?
He's a really bright guy, and he's a guy who, if you do work with him, I don't know that there's just one thing I really enjoy working with him. He's a really fun football mind, an underrated football mind, because people always like to talk about the crazy stuff he says, but he's got a great mind for the game. It's really fun to hear him talk football philosophy. Of course, he's got quirky stuff that he says, and he knows that, and he's cultivated that personality. But he's actually really pleasant. He's a really nice guy. He's the guy. This is a good way to put it. Everybody who works with Mike Leach, who's on his side, on his team, really enjoys it. He's really easy to work with. But he's a pretty vicious competitor, pretty fierce competitor is probably a better adjective. And if you're competing against him, he's really hard to beat, and he can be really difficult, and he'll needle you, and he knows what he's doing. So isn't that what everybody wants in a coach anyway? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. He's very different on your side than he is to compete against, and he's very hard to beat. But he's actually really pleasant. I mean, we've spent personal time together, and my wife loves him. He's good. He's really very polite, and he's very he's like cowboy. I mean, he's from Wyoming. He's got a cowboy ethics. He's very formal. He's more so than people give him credit for. He's a gentleman around my wife, and I bet you people probably wouldn't realize that in that regard. He's inquisitive, and he asks about you. You know, he's fun. He really is. He's pleasant, which I think folks would say is unexpected. They might think he's abrasive or quirky or weird. He's actually really pleasant. He's really nice.
Coaches shows have got to be a good time, I would imagine.
Easiest hour to fill in America.
Yeah.
Ask one question, go away, let him go for 10 minutes. Phenomenal.
Do you talk about random things too?
We do. That inevitably pops up, and folks ask him crazy stuff. I keep it to football, and not like I only keep it to football, but my general thrust of the Mike Leach Coaches Show is we're here because fans want to know, especially when we're good, and we've been really good. The Cougs are playing Colorado. Let's talk about that. Should tree houses and lemon meringue pie come up, like, yeah, we're going to go there. We'll talk about that. But
you say that from experience, it sounds like.
Correct. Yeah, it's true. Those are two topics that we've gone very deep into. Yeah.
I don't even want to know. Let me end on this note because I did go deep in depth Googling you last night. So I'm just curious. I did find your wedding site. You mentioned your wife.
Yeah.
It said that you met with 4 bullet points. Long run, brunch, spaghetti, and marriage. Is it that easy?
If you get lucky. Talk about right time, right place.
Especially in this industry.
Yeah, seriously. We met. I'm either embarrassed or proud to say we met at CrossFit.
All right.
And then we did go on a long run. We did brunch the next day. Later on the next week, I cooked her spaghetti, which is 1, my go-to, and 2, probably my only actual meal I can really cook. and then that was kind of the deal.
All right, that's Matt Chazanow joining us here on Play-by-Playcast, the voice of the Washington State Cougars. Listen, it's that easy. You meet somebody at CrossFit, you make them spaghetti, you go for a long run. Like, not that hard. Like, what are we all doing here? Many thanks to Chaz for taking some time to join us. Interesting to hear the Mike Leach takes too, by the way. I thought that was kind of cool. I don't know what I was expecting there. Lemon meringue. I kind of want to hear the audio of lemon meringue pie and tree houses on a coach's show because I want to figure out how to get down that path on a coach's show. like that's probably a really good segment. Like a really good segment. Anyway, many thanks to Chaz, as always, for joining us. If you want to find him on social media, he is at @M_Chaz. At @M_CHAZ, voice of the Washington State Cougars, Matt Chazanow. We'll take a time out, though, this week. We're back next Friday morning with another edition of Play-by-Playcast. Until then, see ya. Hit it, Marshmallow. We're out.